Talk of Muskegon. News Talk 1090, WKBZ.
Welcome. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt. Today we've got with us Senator Arlen Meekhoff. Arlen represents the Republican majority in Michigan Senate out on the floor. He sits on the Government Operations Committee, the Natural Resources, Environmental and Great Lakes, the Regulatory Reform Committees. Arlen, you're a busy man. Yeah,
well, that's the nature of only having 26 senators. You have to be on a number of different committees, and you try to make them all, but sometimes you only go to the ones where you need to vote, because other times you just have to do the reading. Yeah, you got to be on the run constantly. Hey, tell me and the listeners, if you would, Arlen, what is it to be the Republican floor leader? Well, I guess for your listeners, for just a basic understanding of it, on the floor of the Senate, I'm basically the traffic cop. Materials come from the House or stuff that's introduced to governor's appointments. All of those things need to be managed. That information needs to be managed in a certain way legally. It's very capable and great staff that help me keep track of all those things. So we manage the floor, the things that are in front of the senators to vote on, and we kind of massage things as it comes from committee so that, at least if we can, we put things together that make sense so that when a member is studying to be prepared to vote, we try to put all the agricultural things maybe on Tuesday, Wednesday, the budget things on Thursday, things like that. So we try to manage the information the best we can in terms of flow and as in terms of content, so that people are educated when they make their votes. Arlen, how did you get that position? Well, I was elected by my peers, and I was very grateful for their confidence in that. It's a big process thing. I mean, I didn't know how much time and energy it took to manage that process, especially in legal terms. But with my capable staff, we're happy to do that, and my staff does a great job. No question about it. Did you started right out on your first term in that position? Is that right? Yeah, I think I was told I'm the only freshman in 50 years to become the floor leader. Yeah, at the time I remember going, wow, how did you do that, Arlen? But I'm assuming it's because of your 4 years in the House that they knew that you had some experience in the area. Yeah, all of the senators that I'm serving with right now, except with the exception of two, I served with in the House, and I was assistant leader in the House, so I had some track record of leadership and ability to work with folks on both sides of the aisle. Being the kind of anti-regulation guy that I am, when I look at your committees, I like zero bulleted right to the bottom of my handwriting here with the Regulatory Reform Committee. What is that, Arlen? Well, I joke about this a little bit. It's not really a joke, but this is where we handle regulations around any type of alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and things like that. So I joke that they put the only Baptist on that committee, so maybe that's a good thing. Now, when you mentioned one of my favorite topics on that list with firearms, what impact does your committee have on firearms? Well, the last two bills that were coming up actually went to the Judiciary Committee because the person who introduced the bill is on that committee. He wanted it to go there and be heard there. So the last two firearm bills that we had went over there. They made it out of committee, went to the Senate, and basically the governor had some issues with them. But unfortunately, the timing, I think, was really unfortunate when they had the shooting in Connecticut. And then the governor decided he was not going to sign them at the time. But we pulled back from that a little bit. Senator Green has reintroduced some portions of that to help reduce and streamline the regulations in terms of gun boards and things like that. So most of the state handles it very, very well. But there's a number of counties that there still are issues with gun boards and how people are getting their CCW permits issued. So we've been doing a little more background work on that before we bring it out again. Yeah, very, very nice. And the timing, as you pointed out, was just horrific. I know a lot of the folks that travel in my political circles were admonishing the governor for his action. But I, frankly, as much of a gun advocate as I am, I couldn't see a path for him to have actually signed that the way it was written in at that time. Yeah, it would have been very difficult for him to sign it. Any governor, for that matter. It was the most difficult time. And then, of course, all the media hoopla that went around it made it seem like the gun's fault and not the person's fault. So that's a whole other discussion, obviously. Yeah, no question. I'm just trying to get a foundation for myself and the listeners to figure out what
a day in the life of Arlen Meekoff is like. But to do that, I'm trying to figure out these committees. And again, typically, whenever I think of, how you got certain words have beyond the definition, they take on a connotative meaning all of their own. And so whenever I see environmental, my shields almost want to go up. And I'm looking at the Environment and Great Lakes Committee. What does that do, Arlen?
Well, that is we do a lot of deregulating of the DEQ. That's what we've been doing. We've been working hard on that. I was proud to sponsor and get passed and signed by the governor the dune regulation change, and that is significant. And I'll baseline it for everybody and just say, instead of the DEQ being able to regulate you under the use of your dune property along Lake Michigan or some other place, they have to prove what you're doing will scientifically harm the public, not your own property. So we completely changed the way that is now administered and looked at. So a person wants to build a home on their lakefront property, they want to build it of a certain size or anything like that, the permit will be a shall issue permit unless the department can scientifically prove what they're going to do harms the public, and including a driveway, which they've been regulated out of the use of driveways and some other things as well. So that was a big change, and really came down to some brass tacks with the governor to finally get that signed. He wasn't overly enthused about signing it.
Yeah, two questions kind of came to mind while you were talking. The first is just that, and of course I've met Governor Snyder, but I certainly don't know him. The impression that I have is he's vastly more moderate than at least I am, and so when I'm watching him wrestle with some of these conservative or limited government issues, I'm assuming he does have some pushback on them, such as what you just described.
Yeah, he does, and I'm not saying that the governor is apolitical, but he basically just looks at a problem and tries to figure out the best solution to solve the problem. And sometimes it appears conservative, sometimes it appears more centrist, sometimes it even appears more to the left. But he's just totally focused on relentless positive action and find a problem, design a solution, fix the problem, measure it, move on to the next problem.
If he can truly dial himself back from taking a political position and just look at a cure position, then I would applaud him, even if I didn't necessarily agree with him. Yeah. But the other point that came to my mind while you were describing that is, what kind of pushback did you get from the bureaucracy, the folks at DEQ, et cetera?
Well, the director, Dan Wyatt, is a terrific guy, and he has the most daunting task around him to try to change the culture over at the DEQ. And they went kicking, dragging, and screaming all the way to the end, and they did everything they could to try to get the thing vetoed or trashed in committee. And we prevailed because they obviously lose a sense of control when they have to prove it by science and honor property rights.
It would seem, though, once they get across the mental bridge that they're going to have to walk, maybe they've already done it, but it would seem like they'd find more personal gratification in seeking success than obstacle.
Well, I think specifically to the dune law, we've actually had people, when a court case as high as the Supreme Court of Michigan, up to $2 million because the department regulated them out of the use of their dune land. It happened right in Port Charlotte Township. So I would have thought, and I do think this is helpful for them, the way we've structured it now, they're basically have to honor the property rights, and then they because the former law, if they followed it exactly, they could deny people the use, and then they go to court. They win in court, and the taxpayer was paying for these people's property. So it was untenable in that sense, because we can't keep paying people $2 million all the time when a law says it takes away their property rights. So we really did a good job mastering that, and I think that's the biggest relief for them. They now have some certainty. They probably don't like it, but they have some certainty.
Agreed. How about natural resources? What is that about, other than the obvious?
Well, we're doing a big rewrite right now of the wetlands regulations. That we are one of two states that can write our own wetland permitting, and it's good and bad because we're still under the EPA, and our laws under our last audit, the EPA said we were significantly out of compliance. There's all kinds of issues around blueberry growers and a whole bunch of other things that we've been dealing with, and Director Wyatt is working with the EPA. This is one of the things I think for Michigan, we have the most to lose if we can't regulate our own wetlands. We then have to rely on somebody in Chicago to approve our permits. Maybe you don't like the DEQ, but at least you know the devil that you have here in the DEQ. You know how to deal with them. and we're going to do a rewrite of that. He's got a draft in front of us that we're going to start hearing in committee next week, and has pretty good support. There's a couple folks that aren't on board yet, but I think there's a couple more tweaks, and it will help immensely our blueberry farmers here on the west side.
Very, very nice. The next on my list, Arlen, government operations. Is that some kind of mechanism I hope to shrink government?
Well, what it is, I think that's only met just a couple of times. That is actually when the majority leader finds a bill that somebody's introduced that he wants total control of. He's the committee of that. He's the chair of that committee. So he will refer that to government ops, so he is then in control of the bill if it ever gets a hearing. Some people call that the dead zone. Other people call it that's where he puts stuff until he wants to deal with it.
Okay, that's fair enough. I've got big, gigantic, bold note on my notes here. Arlen, tell me where we're at with right to work. And by the way, before you even answer that, I got to applaud you personally. What a great job you've done for Michigan.
Well, thank you, Mike. Of all the things, well, there's a couple of things that I'm very, very proud of, but this one is very personally proud of this one. I didn't think I would get to actually talk about this till maybe my second term if I was fortunate enough to serve a second term. And yet the conditions came together around freedom to choose, as we call it, or freedom to work. Michigan became the 24th state on December 6th to do it. And amongst a lot of things at the Capitol that went on, I think you probably saw the news, we prevailed again. And the people that are detracting from it at this point are folks that are arguing about the process. They aren't able to make any claims on the merit of the issue because they don't have any merit. It's terrific. Michigan, there are more people, more of these job site selector folks that work for major national companies that are looking at Michigan now. We are on their top 10 list just because of this right now and the financial stuff that we've done.
Yeah, I on a personal basis, one of my daughters a few years ago was having a very difficult time conceiving a child. Went through all of the tests and all of the medical processes and the injections, and it went on and on and on. And so while she's going through that process, she's working at one of the West Michigan drugstores that's unionized, and of course they're taking her wages from her and contributing to pro-abortion causes and politics.
Yeah.
And it was, to me, it was, and I hate to use these words flippantly or casually, but to me it is truly, like Jefferson said, it's tyrannous to take someone's wages and to contribute them to causes that they don't believe in. And so the idea that you were able to, with your associates or your colleagues, push that through, I can't tell you how personally pleased we really are. I'm not sure that Michigan realizes in its entirety yet what that loss of burden means to us.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks understand it. I mean, we are considered one of the biggest unionized states, and if it can be done in Michigan, it can be done in any state, and I believe there'll be several following Michigan. I mean, took some bold and courageous action. I got to tell you, the governor really wasn't there, neither was the Senate Majority Leader, and this having been my bill, I worked probably harder than I've worked on anything in my life on how to convince people that this was right for Michigan, all 10 million people. So whether you support collective bargaining or not, and I believe there should be collective bargaining, if management isn't acting in a certain way and you want to form and do some things like that and have a group represent you, you should have every right to do that. Freedom to choose or freedom to work does not negate that in any way. You still can do that.
Absolutely, but it's got to be frankly, when you look at unionism, it's got to be a product that has a value to the people that are paying for it, like anything else you might pay for.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's going to be a big change in the way the unions present themselves to the people that they want to have contribute. They have to market it and say, here's some things that we can do for you, and it has real value. And the person can look at their pile of money. It's $900 or $1,000 a year typically. And will I get enough value for that $1,000 for them to represent me? And they have a choice.
Little less swagger, a little more value. Sounds good.
Yes.
that's kind of how
I think that Michigan is well positioned. I mean, Indiana, my colleagues that I know in Indiana are just a little bit upset that we did it so quickly because they were marketing it as an advantage.
Well, I think what it's going to mean, in fact, I'm hearing rumors that it's already meaning that, but if you were a big corporation somewhere looking for a place to expand and grow, I don't think Michigan's been on that list for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think the passage of this will allow people to say, okay, so Michigan does have some freedom. It's not just a gigantic union juggler.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing it most in the service union sector. We're hearing mostly from teachers and other folks that are not auto workers unions or not Teamsters, but they're saying, how soon can I get out of my contract? Well, when their contract is open the next time, that's when you can negotiate to get out. And I'm not going to say to you or your listeners that will be easy. I'm sure they're going to get some pressure from the inside to remain with their union. But again, I think there's a strong enough group of people inside unions, because I've heard from many of them while we were going through this, how critical this is for them, because they're so personally offended that the money that they were contributing was being used for causes that were just repulsive to them, and they wanted no part of it. They didn't mind the other stuff, bargaining for pay and benefits, that was fine, but the other stuff really bothered them.
It's like, frankly, there are a fair number of folks that come into Renegade River looking at firearms that are union working people that, they're feeling a little bit of sense of freedom, because in the past they're hunters, they're gun advocates, and yet their union wages were being used to promote contrary political candidacies. Arlen, we need to go to a break, but when we come back, I've got a dozen questions about prevailing wage. So, folks, we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt. And today our guest is Senator Arlen Meekhof. Welcome back, Arlen.
Thank you, Mike. Hey,
now, just to kind of segue where we left off, do me a favor. I see you're very involved in prevailing wage. Tell me a little bit, what caused you to embrace that, Arlen?
Well, as I was running for the House the first time, I ran into a gentleman. Well, actually, kind of a weird coincidence. I ran into a lady that I had gone to school with and asked if I had ever met her husband. I said, no, I had not. And I come to find out he was a business manager for Allendale Schools. And he sat down and started talking to me about what prevailing wage was doing to Allendale. At that point, they were going to the public to ask for a millage to build 2 new schools, which they needed. We were running out of space, and Allendale was growing. And they had to. They asked the public if they could go out and borrow $60 million to build 2 new schools, a junior high and an elementary school. And the public affirmatively voted for the millage. As he broke that all out for me, he says, "Here's what I want to show you." He says, out of that $60 million, and the way the law reads now, because this public money is being used that way, it must be a prevailing wage job. And that prevailing wage is set across the state, and it's usually a union wage. I'll be real frank about it. It's what a union wage is. So basically, free market shops were being excluded from, and still are to this day, excluded from bidding on or even having the opportunity to look at projects to build schools. So he said, we figured out in here what the cost of, because we know what somebody else has had a private school built for, that the cost of this prevailing wage to Allendale is about $6 million out of that $60 million. He said, so that's a lot of money, for one. But then he relayed it in a more better terms, and I think your listeners will understand this as well. He said, it's like a mortgage. The millage is like a mortgage. It's going to be for 30 years. So that's $6 million over 30 years with the interest expense is about $12.5 million.
Incredible.
That means the citizens of Allendale, on top or inside of all of that, are paying about $12 million more for those 2 schools than they would have had to if a free market shop would have built the school to the same standard, to the same architectural design and everything else, because those standards are there. But that's not money that is paid in taxes and goes to Lansing and gets distributed somewhere else. That's tax money that's collected and spent right there in Allendale. So $12 million more that they'll be paying over 30 years.
Yeah, that's incredible. Now, Arlen, is that the same law that governs, for instance, if the state of Michigan is going to build like the bypass going to Allendale or going near Allendale?
Well, that is a little bit different because that will be probably 80% or better of federal money. So then the Davis-Bacon law overrides. The Davis-Bacon law is actually, the wages is slightly less than our prevailing wage in Michigan. Not a lot, but just a little bit. But so it doesn't have as a big an impact on road construction because it's typically federal funds and other funds mingled, and then that Davis-Bacon prevails. But if it's just strictly state money that's being spent on a community college building or a school or a sewer marine wall project, anything that's just state money, there's anticipated savings to the taxpayer of around $200 million a year. Should we be able to pass the prevailing wage law?
Yeah, that's incredible, especially with a school the way you've presented it for Allendale. And what I couldn't help but thinking about while you were describing the $12 million is all the times during that period of time the school is going to be looking for more money to continue to fund itself, and it's like the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah. And they can't use any of that money for operations. The money they borrowed and that they're paying back can only be used, for the cost of building the schools.
But if their debt service was lower, then it seems like the operational budget would be better. Am I thinking about that wrong?
Yeah, that is true, marginally true. But again, when they're borrowing from the school loan bond fund and paying that way, it can only be done for building construction and other things like that. Operationally, we do that on the per pupil funding on a Proposal A.
Okay. Where are we at in the battle for prevailing wage?
It's kind of being held hostage right now by the Democrats. They are a little bit concerned that we passed right to work and a bunch of other things, which I'll describe a little later. They would like the governor to take that totally off the table. And then in turn, they would start talking about ways that we can help the transportation funding or whatever it is we're going to do for the condition of Michigan's roads. And I'm not really too eager to make that a trading piece because I think it has immense possibilities for our local communities.
Any idea where Governor Snyder is on this topic?
When I talked to him about it personally, he understands the issue. He has not made a commitment either way. Again, we have several big problems in which to solve. I don't know, this is on his A plate, but he is aware of it, keenly aware of it, because that's what the Democrats have asked for, something in trade.
Okay. And the next step is what?
Well, if we are fortunate enough to have a hearing on it, then we'll start bringing in associated builders and contractors. We'll bring them into committee and just show all the things that we're able to do, what happens in other states when they change this law, what kind of savings that people can anticipate. But you can expect that union folks will come out with, it's an attack on working families and it's a safety issue and all kinds of stuff that really doesn't have anything to do with the issue about using taxpayer money wisely.
Okay. We're not wanting to dramatically change subject, but I guess it is. Where are we at on Michigan's healthcare exchange?
This is a complex issue because of the president who appears to do whatever it is he wants to do. And those are, again, my personal opinions. I hope I'm not offending your listeners, but given it's your radio show, I don't think I am. So.
You're probably right, Arlen.
We had three kind of choices. We could make a state exchange, we could do a partnership, or we just let the federal government do it. And so far, we've just chosen to let the federal government do it, which comes with some advantages and disadvantages. Some of the advantages are we don't have to create any infrastructure to handle most of it. We have to do some, but it's quite limited. Some of the disadvantages are the folks that are going to be selling health insurance won't necessarily be registered or licensed in the state of Michigan to sell health insurance.
Right. Now, I hate to sound shrill and naive, but there's nothing that a sovereign state can do to defend itself. Or what would Nancy say? Nancy Reagan, can't we just say no?
Well, here's the thing. The Congress passed the law, and it is the law of the land. Everybody that I talk to, and most everybody that I represent, detests it. But we do have to follow the law, and the attorney generals and others of other states are still suing. But we have to operate on the basis that if it's to move forward, we have to do the best to protect our citizens. And again, three really bad choices. None of them are great, but we wouldn't have to make them if it weren't for the Obamacare law.
Of these three ugly choices, Arlen, which one are you supporting?
Well, I could have gone for any of the three. There's pluses and minuses, but the one just letting the federal government take over, and here's my small business guys my insurance agents are talking to me and saying, I've done all this continuing education, licensing, and be qualified by the state to sell the products that I sell because we don't want somebody taking advantage of somebody. we are now going to allow people who don't have any of this education or licensing to sell health insurance to people, and it could be members of ACORN, could be members of SEIU, the ACLU. You don't know who the federal government is going to partner with, and they will do this to get their stuff out, which to me is community organizing at the base level. Not only do these people sell them health insurance, they'll have their emails and phone numbers and contacts, all the information they need to talk to them and contact them around election time. And that to me, is the most disheartening of all of this thing, because it's a ruse, I think, to get to that level, to be able to contact people and community organize at the base level.
I absolutely agree with you. Tell me on a slightly different. I'm going down a list here. You'll probably take notice of, but on a different front, Governor Snyder is trying to promote a road tax. Where's that at? Well,
we joke with the governor. He usually puts out stuff that's so onerous so that we fix it and make it look better. But it's hard to put. It's hard to put lipstick on this pig. But it's. I think I've held several different public meetings in regards to roads. One with Representative Victory, one with Representative Price, and just took people's input. And invariably, when I asked the question, how many people think our roads are bad, everybody's hand goes up. And I said, well, here's our choices. We can curb our budget and incrementally spend money. We can do what the governor's talking about. We can do some variations of it. We can change some of our other things. And at the end of the day, we have to figure out, if we got this growing and burgeoning economy and products and services need to travel, they need to have a good place to do that. So how are we going to do it? And most people, when you ask them, how much are you willing to pay more, nobody raises their hand. So there lies the question.
I guess, Arlen, for me, I remember when this first started percolating from the governor's office, and I had a good friend of mine from the state GOP at the time sit down and talk with me as a Tea Party member back. It's been a couple of years now, but I said then the same thing that I'll say now. If the governor could reinvent the way the state of Michigan does the hiring practices on these projects, at least that, to your earlier point, at least that the state taxpayers' money is funding, it would be a lot easier way to sell it. But for the governor to say we need more tax, but by the way, we're not changing the way we do business, to me is too overpowering for me to support.
Yeah. I think for your listeners to understand that the gas tax, if you add cents to the gas tax, it'd be per gallon. And just to try to describe this without having a video to describe it, Michigan's has the tax on there. There's per gallon federal and per gallon state, and then there's 6% sales tax on top of that. And our sales tax is tied to the gallon. So when we have more fuel-efficient cars or even battery-operated cars, we are buying less and less and less and less gallons. And if the tax is tied to the gallon per gallon, your revenue stream will continue to go down. So even if we said we're going to raise it by 10 cents, some future legislature is going to come back and say, oh, well, the revenue stream kept going down, so we got to ask you again. So that, to me, is one issue that has to be fixed. The formula we have in place doesn't work. You'll continue to have less and less revenue. So there's one of the thoughts is to put the tax on the wholesale price instead of the gallon. So that way it would grow with inflation. And if we had done this 15 years ago, we would have the $1 billion to spend on roads. That's the dirty little secret.
Yeah, that's an absolute mathematical truth.
Yeah. So that's one of the things I think needs to be addressed. The other is registrations. A lot of folks feel that registrations are the way we should fund roads. I know Indiana, of our neighboring states, do it substantially different than we do, and their road tax is a little different. But I think our average registration here is between $125 and maybe $200 and so dollars. But in Indiana, I think they start around $500. So again, they start a little differently than we do and do their tax different. Then we have the 6 cent sales tax on top of there, which everybody thinks goes to roads. It does not.
Where does it go?
It goes to, that was a proposal A deal. That money goes to schools and local governments. So
right.
if you wipe that 6 cents off the top of gas and put it on and do a formula on the wholesale price, you've created a $1 billion hole. How are you going to fund schools? So you solved one problem and created another one. So there's some thought about putting something on the ballot that people understand and say, do you want to do this or do you want to do that? Or how would we do it? And I think if we're going to have a bipartisan solution, you'll see some of those things happen. But if it's just a Republican solution, I think we're probably going to go to the tact of, as the economy grows here in Michigan, we're going to curb spending on almost everything we can and only take the incremental revenue that's improved in this state and spend it on roads. And that will be substantially less than what the governor's asking.
And on tax, just before we run out of time in this segment, Arlen, I hear quite a bit of pushback and have heard since the senior tax fell into place. And some of the concerns I guess I may personally have is do you think that that's going to make the governor vulnerable in the next election?
That's a fair question. I don't know on the politics side, but the pension tax was basically setting up the fairness. We had some people that were paying, like the folks that are paying on their 401k as they draw it down, and they're working at Walmart. They're still paying the tax, but the pensions were exempted, especially on the public side, and that wasn't a comfortable thing to do, but it was a fairness issue. If everybody's going to live here, everybody should be treated fairly and flatten it out.
My concern is, first off, it's hard to argue with the fact that if you're not paying, you ought to contribute. It's very difficult to argue with that. That said, it seems like a fair percentage of the voters tend to be senior citizens. And with that said, I know a lot of them are fairly disgruntled. People that, frankly, I've seen Tea Party senior citizens that are very disgruntled with the idea of this tax.
Yeah.
And that's a concern as we look forward. We certainly remember what Grand Home did for Michigan. And so I would hate to see them. I can't imagine the Democrats using tax reduction as their intro to the governor's office, but I'd put nothing past them.
Yeah. Well, again, we exempted people that were already retired and started at a lower level, so when they still had time to work and plan until they got to retirement. Unpleasant, very unpleasant. But again, we lowered and flattened the tax for everybody and have more participants. And that's a good tax policy to have. To lower the rate, but with more things or more people contributing, then everybody has skin in the game.
Yeah, hard to argue with the skin in the game position. Arlen, we're gonna slip to a break, but when we come back, I've got some firearms questions for you, and then just maybe a little bit of general feel for the political landscape to kick around.
Great.
We'll be right back, folks. Well, welcome back. You're listening to the Renegade River Show, and my name is Mike Hewitt. And today we are on with Senator Arlen Meekhof. Welcome back, Arlen.
Thank you, Mike.
Hey, in this final little bit of time we got, I guess where I want to begin is what we were talking about off air, is that it's pretty easy for myself on Facebook or people in general to be very, very caustic, I guess might be the best word, in terms of taking a political position on one issue or another, and having, frankly, let me kind of purse it this way: having campaigned against you before, Arlen, I know that you're very conservative, and yet from time to time, when the politics calls for it, I've also seen you to be a little bit pragmatic and understand the nature of pushing forward. So, what's your thoughts on that kind of?
Yeah, as we were talking off the air, when I was in the House, I served in the minority, and it's very easy then to throw grenades in the tent and talk about all the stuff that you want to do, knowing full well that you can't, because the governor would never sign it or the other side would never go along. But now in the majority and in the part of the senior leadership, I mean, you got to fix the problems. I mean, you can't just say, well, blame the other guy, or we're going to do something. The key is you got to get 56 House members, 20 senators, and one governor all on the same page how you're going to fix a problem. And sometimes those things don't look the same when they started to when they ended. But at the end of the day, you still got to fix the problems. And I think some of the things that we've been able to accomplish, eliminating the Michigan business tax and down to the corporate tax, unemployment insurance reform, which save our job providers about $3 billion. Reform workers' compensation, something that hadn't been done in over 50 years in Michigan, modernized it. A lot of different things. We stopped a new ergonomics law that would have been imposed on us and would have cost our job providers another $400 or $500 million a year. I mean, there's just a myriad of things that we've done that we've had to come together, and most of them have been the solutions that only Republican votes have done. And we're happy to do that. But and sometimes as you get closer to these things like road funding and auto no fault and some of these other things, you need a buy-in from the other side as well, because they need to be part of the solution. And that sometimes moves your solution closer to the middle. But again, you still got to solve the problem. You can't just let it go.
No question about it. I can tell you from the outside looking in, well, I'll just talk about Governor Snyder. I would have never, ever dreamed that some of the things that have come to pass during his terms, during his governorship, would have come under him. So I can't tell whether he's a pragmatist or understands, or if he's being dragged along by our wonderful state legislature or what. But I've got to applaud him, and probably the state legislature, in truth.
Yeah, and some of it's true both ways, I would think. There's some things that he thinks is the best solution, and we try to go along, or there's other times when we said, no, you're not doing that, we're going to do it this way. And it's a good teamwork. I think at this point we could say we work very well together, and any disagreements we've had have been, like family. You don't hear about them in the public, but we still got to, at the end of the day, the citizens have elected us to be responsible, to run the state, fiscally responsible, and we've responded. Our bond rating's going up, more people, our unemployment's going down, personal wealth is continuing to go on the rise, a bit slower probably than we want. But I mean, all the things that we've done and set the stage for Michigan to be successful again are in place, and we're going to continue to tweak those and fine-tune those so that your kids and my kids and grandkids and your grandkids, Mike, can all live and work here in Michigan because it's their best option. And we want them all to live here and have that ability. So when you and I are in our rocking chair talking about old politics, the grandkids they're all here, we will have done our job.
You got to hurry, Arlen, because I don't think that vision's that far off.
The rocking chair?
Yeah. Hey, Anna, changing gears a little bit again. What is your? Have you got a favorite candidate for the coming Michigan U.S. Senate race?
Well, there's been some considerable talk behind the scenes, and nobody's really emerged. I know that Gary Peters has emerged on the other side, and it appears that pathway has been cleared for him by the Levins, and I think that was done when the redistricting was done. Gary Peters did not run against Sander Levin. He ran against Hanson Clark, defeated Hanson Clark. I think that was the signal that I picked up that, well, when Levin retires, Carl Levin retires, then Peters would be given the nod, and it appears that's what's been going on. And the pathway from other people has been basically cleared for him. I think the rest of the election cycle, in terms of Attorney General, the Governor, and Secretary of State, it doesn't appear that they have a very deep bench on people from which to draw. So I think we're going to do very, very well there. That Senate thing, though, is an opportunity we shouldn't pass up. I mean, we really, there's probably only 12 seats that are actually in play at all of the Senate of the 20 somewhere that are up. So if we have a great, strong candidate, that pulls up all of our candidates as well. And also, this is kind of a practical matter, if there's really no challenger to Gary Peters, the Dems can spend their money everywhere else in the state on other things, including the state Senate or state House. And so we really need a good, strong candidate up there to keep them honest. And if we have the right candidate, and I mean, everything's got to line up perfectly, I think we could have a Republican senator. But again, no one's really stepped out. Mike Rogers, Congressman Mike Rogers' name has been mentioned often. I have not talked to him, and I don't have a relationship with him, so I couldn't really answer if he's considering or not. But that would probably be our top candidate.
I got to tell you, one of the areas that I've been fooling myself into, I don't know, maybe just being naive, but the Republicans have a tendency of having very aggressive primaries, and that's true from the state house all the way to the presidency. Now, the Democrats this is the first time in a long time that both, that has been a situation where it was going to be up for grabs in terms of party nomination, Democrat or Republican. And so I've kind of been soothing myself with the idea that if we have a spirited primary and tear ourselves apart, that they would also. But the idea that they're able to get behind Gary is concerning to me, to say the least.
Yeah, well, then if they don't have a primary, they can marshal the resources and save it for the general.
Right, absolutely. And meanwhile, again, while our side is having a very contested primary, and it's so we're spending our resources and injuring our potential leader candidate. It's a problem.
Yeah, it is.
I keep hoping that there'll be some star that bubbles to the top so that we can all unite behind him or her, and then make that a general race rather than a protracted primary.
Yeah, and if it's the right candidate, it'll get national attention and national money as well. So that would be, I think, most beneficial for us.
Hey, we've only got a few minutes left. I wanted to ask you just what your general feeling is. It feels like President Obama is being, I hate to be cliche, but the second term curse. It looks like everything he touches of late turns to something smelly. And from Benghazi to everything, the IRS drama, his train wreck of an attempt to gun legislate. Well, what do you see there?
Yeah, it appears that on a good marketing ploy, he was able to be elected the second time, and I don't say that disingenuously. I think there was enough for us to know and think about prior to the election, but he is the willing accomplices of the media. I think you probably noted that to your listeners as well. But I think you're right. The Benghazi thing is really problematic. We're talking about national security stuff, and if that indeed is framed in a way that I'm understanding it might have been covered up, or that's the cover-up's usually the where they get into trouble, not the actual problem with the policy or what they did. So I'm hoping that that's wrong and that we did the right things. Given the stuff I've been hearing, I'm not so sure. The gun legislation was just a plain overreach. I mean, he even mentioned it during some of his campaign things that some people tend to cling too much to their guns and Bible and everything else, and I think he is the wrong part of the vision of that, of the Constitution, that it isn't about hunting and it isn't about owning firearms. It's about protect yourself from the tyranny of your own government. That's why that's in there, along with some of the other amendments. So I think he's totally off base on that.
You saw that recent poll that demonstrated where the average American thinks that gun violence is up when in truth it's down, even while concealed carry is up? Yeah,
and I find it amazing. I personally carry myself for very many reasons, but one being I'm kind of important to my family, and the police officer only responds after the fact, and I'm personally responsible for my own safety and protection, and I hope everybody takes it seriously.
Absolutely. Tell me, Arlen, before we run out of time, I know you've got a big agenda going forward. Is there anything that our listeners can do that you'd like to have them do to help support your efforts?
Well, I think be informed voters and do all that you can, maybe even become a precinct delegate. Do some things in your community where you're involved and help make decisions, because we all want to live in a better community, and it starts with people being involved. And I know we're busy with our kids' school stuff and everything like that, but when you leave decisions up to somebody else, you quite often will scratch your head and say, why are they doing that? Well, be part of the who is that. Be part of the group that makes decisions, and get on a school board or get on something where you can make a difference and help make our community better. And I think everybody should do that above and beyond their church commitments or their social commitments. Be part of your community in a government way that makes it a better place.
How about write your legislator? Does that make a difference, Arlen?
Well, between the 400 or 500 emails I get every day, that's still good.
Okay.
And I'll be honest with you, I don't read them all, but I do get the flavor from my staff, and I do respond to many of them myself personally. But when they're writing, here's a key thing that I like to pick up, and I tell people, I do this, I talk to kids in government classes, give me a solution. Okay? Don't just complain about the problem. It's very much like if you're going to your local coffee shop, there's normally a table where the 6 or 8 guys sit around and they complain about the world. But most times they don't even come up with any kind of solution. I'm about making solutions and correcting problems, but sometimes those solutions come from a lot of other places, or 2 or 3 of them together make a better solution than what I'm thinking about or what the legislature is thinking about.
Very, very nice.
When presented with a problem, you're thinking about road funding, you're thinking about a number of things in your community, think of a solution. That's the real smart people can come up with the solutions, not just complain.
Senator Arlen Meekhoff, thank you for what you're doing and for coming on the Renegade River Show.
Thank you, Mike. I much appreciate it.
All right. Listeners, I will talk to you all next Sunday. Have a great week, and happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there.